The early 20th century, a time of progress, chaos, and mustaches so powerful they could declare a war. Between 1900 and 1939, the world would witness invention, destruction, jazz, and a global economic meltdown that made everyone sad and weird, also known as the Roaring Twenties. Which leads us to say, how did this happen? This happened from the Second Industrial Revolution. At the dawn of the 20th century, humanity was inventing things at an alarming rate. Things like the airplane, the radio, and the vacuum cleaner were made this time, but not just stuff of daily necessity. Things of destruction were also made. This takes us to World War I. Wait, what? World War I? Yes, World War I. There was 4 main reasons as to why this war started. First up, militarism.
So basically, militarism is like when a country acts like that one kid from school and keeps on writing about how many Nerf guns he has, except instead of Nerf guns.
Yup, you heard it right, battleships. In the early 1900s, European nations started obsessively building up their armies and navies. It was like an arms race, but instead of winning trophies, you win potential global destruction. Germany and Britain were especially competitive about their navies. Germany wanted to catch up, while Britain refused to let go of its unofficial title, Ocean Boss. This arms race made tension skyrocket, because when you spend years making really expensive weapons, it kind of feels like a waste if you don't eventually use them. Next up on the list of terrible ideas that somehow made sense at that time, alliances. Here's a clip of an actual alliance being performed.
Hey!
Wow!
The main squads were the Triple Entente, which is what you just saw. France, Russia, and Britain, and the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. They were basically rival gangs, but with fancier hats and way more artillery. But there was a problem with this alliance system. Once a country got into a scrap, these alliances meant everyone else got dragged into it as well. It turned a small, localized incident into a giant worldwide mess, kind of like a group chat argument that escalates way too fast. And before you knew it, half of Europe was packing up their rifles and heading to the front lines, because apparently no one thought of just talking it out. Which leads us to imperialism.
Imperialism is when a country looks at another country and goes, you know what, that one would look great in my collection.
In the early 1900s, powerful European nations were scrambling to snatch up as many colonies as possible. Africa, Asia, the Pacific.
India, you make me so wealthy, I could never think of letting you go. Something crazy would have to happen. A huge global war that kills millions of people. But that would never happen. Oh yeah, that's not happening.
Not only Britain taking over the subcontinent of India, they also took over Africa. They called it the Scramble for Africa. But honestly, it was less of a scramble and more of a greedy free-for-all, with terrible maps and zero regard for the people actually living there.
It's like if someone broke into your house, stole your stuff, and then argued with your friend over who gets your TV.
The competition for colonies made tensions between countries skyrocket. Everyone was paranoid that if they didn't grab enough land, they'd look weak. Nobody wanted to be that awkward guy at the European power party without a colony. There we have it, the 3 main reasons as to why World War I started. But there is one more, and that is nationalism. The part where everyone decides their country is the absolute best, and anyone who says otherwise is probably a traitor. In the early 1900s, every European nation thought they were the best. Germans thought Germany was the greatest thing since sliced bread, which fun fact, Germany also invented. The French believed that they were the heart of civilization. The British were convinced that the sun would never set on their empire. And the Austro-Hungarians, well, no one was quite sure what they were, but they were proud of it anyway. But this isn't entirely just about national pride. It was also about ethnic groups within countries wanting their own nations. Groups like the Serbs, Czechs, and Bosnians were tired of being told what to do by the empires they didn't care about. Balkans, a place so unstable, it was literally called the powder keg of Europe. Nationalism was running wild. No one wanted independence, but no one wanted to back down. It was like a season finale of a messy reality show, but with more rifles. And so nationalism, the last out of the 4 reasons as to why World War I started. So the war's on, millions of soldiers are shipped off to the front lines, and guess what? It's awful.
If you like mud, rats the size of house cats, and diseases with cool names like trench foot, you've loved it.
The fighting style was called trench warfare, which meant digging long, gross ditches in the ground and living in them like miserable mole people, while occasionally charging into machine gun fire. New weapons like machine guns, poison gas, tanks, and planes made battles deadly and messy. Instead of quick victories, armies fought for months to gain a few miserable feet of land. While back home, civilians weren't exactly living the dream either. Governments rationed food, drafted young men, and turned factories into weapon-making machines. Women stepped into jobs usually held by men because someone had to keep the place running. It was the first total war, meaning entire societies, soldiers, civilians, economies, were all part of the war machine. So the war's over, millions dead, empires collapsed, everyone traumatized. The world would take a long nap and reflect on their life choices. But no, the 1920s happened.
Oh. The 1920s, also known as the Roaring Twenties, was a decade where everyone coped with the World War I by drinking, dancing, and inventing jazz.
Cities were buzzing, cars were everywhere, radios were blasting. It felt like people were living their best lives. Though youth rebelled against old traditions, women gained the right to vote in several countries, and that everyone was low-key pretending that a horrific world war hadn't just happened.
Basically one big post-traumatic distraction party.
It was a decade of contradictions, freedom and repression, progress and poverty, jazz and despair. And just when people thought things couldn't get any worse, the Great Depression rolled in.
In 1929, the US economy crashed worse than just a note trying to stay awake in class.
Within weeks, banks failed, businesses closed, and millions lost their jobs. Unemployment skyrocketed, breadlines wrapped around the city blocks, entire families lost their homes, people had to make do with what little they had, which mostly meant eating sad soups and hoping things would magically fix themselves.
The Great Depression didn't just wreck the economy, it wrecked hope. Hope in the government, hope in banks, and hope in rich people named Charles.
In America, President Herbert Hoover's strategy was basically to cross his fingers and say it'll work out. And because of Germany's entire economy being reliant on America, this affected Germany severely. So while economies were collapsing and people were trading their shoes for soup, politics also decided to lose its mind.
The interwar years were like a global group project where everyone hated each other and no one agreed on anything.
Old empires were gone, new governments popped up like weeds, and most of them were, how do we say this, terrible. Revolutions, coups, and uprisings became casual weekend events. In Russia, the Bolsheviks had already overthrown the monarchy in 1917, and were now building the world's first communist state, a place where everyone was equal and equally terrified.
First, Vladimir Lenin set it up. Then, in 1924, he died, and so Joseph Stalin took over. Picture a guy with a mustache so thick it had a gravitational pull. And you've got Stalin.
Mussolini invented something called fascism, which is basically dictatorship but with extra uniforms and dramatic speeches. And in Germany, things were especially unstable. Their new democracy, called the Weimar Republic, was like a toddler trying to drive a bus, doomed from the start.
It was a mess of hyperinflation, angry mobs, and political extremists on every corner, which, spoiler, it's a recipe for disaster.
By the late 1920s and early 30s, extremist groups like the Nazis started gaining support by blaming everything on minorities, other countries, and basically anyone who wasn't them. So, right, remember how I said that Germany was having a bad time? Well, it got worse.
At one point, the German economy became so bad, you could use the bills to do your wallpaper. Some people even did!
Angry, broke, and humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, Germans were desperate for someone, anyone, to promise them greatness again. That's when Adolf Hitler showed up, shouting, waving his arms around, and making terrifying promises. Hitler's Nazi party blamed Germany's problems on minorities, political enemies, and the treaty itself. He promised jobs, pride, and revenge, and people bought it.
By 1933, he became chancellor and almost immediately turned Germany into a full-blown dictatorship. Goodbye democracy, and hello mustache-fueled nightmare.
Germany started rearming and making legal deals and annexing land. Britain and France, exhausted and still traumatized by World War I, mostly just said things like "please stop" while looking nervously at each other. In 1939, Germany began to invade Poland, and just like that, the world was plunged into another global conflict. World War II had begun. Lenin and Stalin weren't big fans of organized religion, and the US and Europe still believed in church and the clergy and stuff.